The night is quiet. Darkness wraps round your room like a soft blanket outside. The wind hums gently. The world slows down, and sleep draws near. But before you drift away, let me take you somewhere else, a place where shadows whisper, where old secrets breathe beneath creaking floorboards. You are safe here. Let your body relax. Breathe slowly, deeply, and listen as I whisper you into the darkness. The fog was already thick when Thomas arrived at the Everpeen Hotel. His footsteps crunched softly on the gravel pathway, each step echoing faintly in the dense silence. The towering pine trees loomed above him, ancient sentinels swaying gently as the wind whispered through their skeletal branches. Cold drizzle slid down the back of his neck, soaking into his collar, while his breath unfurled in pale, ghostly clouds before his face. The night smelled of wet earth, moss, and distant rain. A sharp, metallic chill hung in the air. Thomas pulled his coat tighter around him, feeling the damp fabric press against his chest, the cold seeping into his skin like tiny, icy needles. Ahead, faint golden lights glimmered through the heavy mist. The hotel, it stood like a forgotten monument, its weathered stone walls wrapped in ivy, half swallowed by shadows. The building's tall, arched windows reflected only darkness, as though guarding secrets behind the glass. Thomas paused, his eyes drawn to the faded wooden sign swinging slowly above the doorway. The Everpeen Hotel. Established 1892, he exhaled slowly, his heart beat slightly faster than usual. Not quite fear, but a heavy awareness pressing on his chest. The kind of subtle unease that prickled just beneath the surface of his skin. A distant owl hooted once, followed by silence. Then came the steady rhythm of raindrops tapping on the wooden porch roof. Tap, tap, tap. As Thomas reached the entrance, the heavy oak door creaked open before his fingers even touched the handle. Standing there, perfectly still, was an elderly woman. She was small, almost fragile in stature. Her pale grey hair pulled into a tight, severe bun. Her dress was long, dark, old-fashioned, its fabric somehow absorbing the dim glow of the lantern behind her. Her face was delicate, yet her deep-set eyes gleamed with a strange mixture of kindness and something else. Something unreadable. "Good evening," she whispered, her voice barely above the sound of the rain. "You must be our guest." Thomas felt a faint chill run down his spine. He offered a polite nod, forcing a gentle smile. "Yes, I have a reservation." "Of course," she replied softly, with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "My name is Agatha. Welcome to Everpeen." Her voice was soft, controlled, as if each syllable was carefully weighed before leaving her lips. There was no warmth, but neither was there hostility. Just an odd stillness. The air inside the lobby was warmer, though the smell of lavender mingled with the faint musk of aged wood and dust. The flickering fire in the stone hearth painted the walls with slow-moving shadows, dancing across faded portraits and antique chairs. Thomas found his gaze lingering briefly on one particular portrait, a young woman with hauntingly pale eyes and a faint, unsettling smile. For reasons he couldn't explain, a tight knot formed low in his stomach. Agatha moved with graceful slowness behind the front desk, her fingers tracing along the polished wooden surface before retrieving a heavy brass key from beneath the counter. "You'll be staying in room 12, she said quietly, placing the key into his palm with cool, dry fingers. Thomas's eyes wandered beyond her, down the long, dim hallway behind the desk. The corridors stretched into the darkness, its flickering wall lamps casting uneven pools of yellow light. His gaze stopped at a door far at the end. The number on it was barely visible, distorted by the dim glow. He squinted. 13. A strange heaviness settled in his chest, like a stone dropped into still water, almost reflexively. Thomas asked, "Is anyone else staying here tonight?" Agatha's eyes held his gaze for a moment longer than expected. The corners of her lips stiffened, almost imperceptibly. "No, sir," she answered softly. "You are our only guest tonight." The words hung in the air like a thin veil of cold mist for a brief moment. Thomas felt a shiver crawl up the back of his neck, not from the cold this time, but from something he couldn't quite name. Agatha's faint smile returned, as if dismissing the moment. "Please, enjoy your stay." Thomas climbed the creaking wooden staircase, the old brass key cold and solid in his palm. Each step released a soft groan beneath his weight, as though the stairs themselves whispered their ancient complaints into the dim hallway. The second floor corridor welcomed him with a thick embrace of shadows. The wall lamps flickered weakly, casting trembling halos of pale yellow onto faded wallpaper, their soft buzz mixing with the faint howl of wind slipping through the cracks of the old windows outside. The rain had turned into a slow, steady drizzle. Water tapped softly against the glass like slender fingers knocking politely for attention as Thomas reached his door. Room 12. His eyes involuntarily shifted across the narrow hall. There it was, room 13. The door stood heavy and still, its dark wooden surface almost seeming to absorb the faint light around it. The number plate, slightly tarnished with age, gleamed faintly in the dim glow. For a moment, it felt as if something behind that door was silently watching him, studying him from the shadows. A shiver traced a careful path down his spine. Thomas quickly unlocked his room, eager to shut the world outside. Inside, the room felt warmer, though not entirely comforting. The faint aroma of lavender oil mixed with something older musty fabric, ancient wood, and the trace of long-forgotten memories, lingering like unseen guests. The curtains, heavy and velvet, swayed ever so slightly from a draft creeping through the window frame's old seams. The tall canopy bed dominated the room's center, its crimson drapes catching the soft flicker of the fireplace nearby. Shadows from the flames danced gently across the walls, elongating and shrinking like silent puppets performing an ancient, forgotten play. Thomas set his suitcase down and exhaled slowly, trying to shake off the strange tension that clung to his skin. "It's just an old building," he whispered to himself. "Creaking floors, loose windows, nothing more." But his words felt hollow. The unsettling stillness carried a weight of its own, changing into his sleepwear. He approached the bed and carefully slipped beneath the thick, heavy covers. The mattress dipped with a slow sigh beneath him, releasing the faint scent of aged springs and worn padding. The warmth of the blanket wrapped around his body like a cocoon, offering a temporary sense of protection from the creeping unease. The room settled into a quiet rhythm, the soft crackle of the fire, the gentle ticking of the clock on the nightstand, tick, tick. Thomas allowed his breathing to slow, eyes growing heavy as he surrendered himself to the inviting embrace of sleep. But as the fragile veil between waking and slumber drew thin, a new sound broke through the calm. Knock, knock, knock. 3. Soft, deliberate taps. At first, he barely registered it. The wind, perhaps, a branch against the window, but the knock came again. Knock, knock, knock. Clearer now, closer, intentional. His eyes opened slowly, pupils adjusting to the dim, flickering light. The small clock read 12:17 a.m. His heartbeat quickened. The knocking repeated, always in precise sets of 3. Knock, 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 knock. It was coming from behind him, from the shared wall between his room and room 13. Thomas sat up, his breath shallow, chest tightening with a creeping anxiety he struggled to dismiss. He strained his ears. Silence then, once more. Knock, knock, knock. The knocks were not rushed. They were patient, measured, almost polite. His skin prickled beneath the thin film of sweat forming along his temples. The air felt thicker now, as though the walls themselves leaned in closer to listen with him. Maybe it's just the pipes, he whispered, but even in his own ears, the explanation sounded weak. The knocking ceased abruptly. The stillness that followed was oppressive, heavy like wet cloth draped over his entire body. The fire crackled on, shadows dancing aimlessly across the walls. Thomas remained frozen, sitting upright in bed, senses sharpened. The ticking clock marked each second with maddening precision. Tick, tick, tick. He whispered again, softer this time, trying to calm himself. Old hotels always have noises, but no amount of reasoning could shake the sensation crawling beneath his skin. Minutes passed, or perhaps longer. Time seemed to stretch, thin and fragile. Finally, Thomas lay back down, pulling the blanket up to his chin, holding his breath for a moment before exhaling slowly. His eyelids grew heavy once more. Then, just as sleep was about to reclaim him, he heard it. Not a knock, not footsteps, a whisper, soft, intimate, close, as if someone stood right beside his ear. Don't open the door. His eyes snapped open, but the room remained empty. Only the firelight danced, flickering in silence. Thomas barely slept that night. After the whisper near his ear, his body froze beneath the thick covers, his breath shallow, eyes wide open, staring at the swaying shadows above. Every creak of the wooden beams overhead sounded louder, heavier, as though the old building itself was breathing with him. The clock continued its steady rhythm, marking every agonizing second. Tick, tick, tick. Minutes bled into hours. Sleep came in brief, restless waves, never deep. Always fragile when morning light finally seeped through the heavy curtains, casting dull grey streaks across the room. Thomas sat up slowly, muscles stiff. From tension, he rubbed his face with both hands, his skin cold and clammy. The events of the night hovered like a fog in his mind, half dream, half reality. The whisper, it had sounded so close, almost like a voice he recognized. It was probably my imagination, he told himself weakly. But even as he stood and crossed the room, his eyes involuntarily flicked toward the shared wall with room 13. The silence from that side of the wall was almost louder than noise. Downstairs, the lobby was empty except for Agatha, who stood perfectly still behind the front desk. Hands folded gently, her eyes lifted the moment he entered, meeting his with a polite, unreadable expression. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," she whispered. Softly, her voice carrying the same strange stillness as the night before. "Good morning," Thomas replied, his throat dry. "It's very quiet here." Agatha's lips curled into a faint smile. "It always is. Guests enjoy the peace." Her gaze lingered on him a moment too long. There was something in her eyes, not unkind, but watchful, cautious. Thomas hesitated, then asked, trying to sound casual, "Is room 13 occupied. Agatha's smile remained, but her head tilted ever so slightly. "No, sir. It hasn't been used for many years." Thomas felt a chill brush his skin. He struggled to hide the unease creeping into his voice. "Strange. I thought I heard noises last night." Agatha's expression didn't change. Her voice lowered further, barely audible. "Old buildings make old noises, Mr. Thomas. The wind, the pipes. They like to speak when the world sleeps." Her words hung in the air like delicate threads of mist. Thomas forced a polite nod and retreated into the dining room. The rest of the day passed uneventfully. The town outside was small and quiet, wrapped in early autumn fog. Thomas wandered the narrow streets, trying to clear his mind. He returned by evening, determined to sleep soundly. But as night fell, so did the weight in the pit of his stomach. The hallway felt darker than before. The lamps flickered, their glow stretching long thin shadows along the narrow corridor like bony fingers. Standing before his door, Thomas's gaze drifted again to room 13. The door remained shut, silent as ever, yet the air around it felt denser, as if the shadows themselves pressed against the wood. For a moment, Thomas thought he saw movement, just the slightest shift in the corner of his eye. A soft fluttering shadow, a breath of darkness pulling back into the crack beneath the door. His breath caught. "You're seeing things," he whispered to himself, but the knot in his stomach tightened. That night, he prepared himself carefully. He left the small bedside lamp on. The fire burned low, casting dim amber light that barely held the shadows at bay. Dot lying beneath the heavy blankets. Thomas listened. The familiar ticking of the clock accompanied him once more. Tick, tick, tick. The fire crackled. The wind hummed softly outside. He forced his breathing too slow. In, out. He repeated a quiet mantra in his head. "It's just an old hotel. Just creaks. Just wind." But deep inside, his body remained tense alert. Hours. Past midnight came and went. The quiet grew heavier, and then, knock, knock, knock. The same deliberate rhythm. Thomas's eyes opened wide, heart leaping against his ribs. Knock, knock, knock. This time, the sound was louder, closer, almost as if it wasn't coming from the wall behind him anymore. Almost as if it was coming from the hallway, directly outside his door. He sat up, ears straining, chest tight. The knocking repeated. 3 slow knocks, a pause. 3 more. His eyes flicked to the door handle. It remained still, yet the faintest vibration pulsed through the old wooden door, as if invisible knuckles rapped gently against it. He held his breath, and then softly came something else, a low, breathy whisper, faint yet unmistakably clear in the stillness. "Let me in ... Thomas's skin crawled. His fingers dug into the heavy blankets, pulling them higher up around his neck. His breath came in slow, shaky waves. Silence returned, but now the silence felt different, as though something was waiting. Right there, on the other side of the door, Thomas remained frozen, muscles taut, eyes fixed on the door, listening. The fire cracked weakly, shadows swaying on the walls like thin, stretching fingers, and then so faint he barely noticed it. He heard it, a soft scrape, like nails, gently dragging down the wood of his door, slow, deliberate, then nothing. Only the steady, ticking clock, mocking his pounding heartbeat. Tick, tick, tick. The night pressed on, and so did the whispers. The weight of the night pressed on Thomas like an invisible hand. He sat motionless beneath the heavy blankets, his back rigid against the headboard. Every muscle in his body trembled under the strain of frozen fear. The dim glow of the fireplace flickered, its dying embers casting long, restless shadows that stretched and curled along the walls like silent, creeping creatures. The scraping at the door had ceased, but what followed was worse. The stillness, it wasn't emptiness. It was presence. A presence that waited. The silence filled the room like thick fog, heavy and stifling, making every breath feel like inhaling liquid air. The tiny ticking of the clock became thunderous. Tick, tick, tick. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat, now pounding louder than the clock, echoing in his ears like distant drums. Every creak of the old wooden beams overhead sounded alive, as if the very bones of the building were shifting, groaning, breathing. His throat was dry, his lips trembling. The fire crackled softly, embers collapsing inward with tiny sighs. The once comforting warmth now felt hollow, incapable of pushing back the dense chill that wrapped itself around him. Time dragged, seconds felt like hours, and then tap, 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 soft, gentle, fingertips lightly caressing the door. It wasn't knocking, it was softer, almost playful. The taps came in no pattern, pausing, returning, hesitant, like a creature unsure of how close it dared to get. Thomas squeezed his eyes shut, whispering a hoarse plea. Please, ... go away, ... The tapping stopped. For a moment, he felt a tiny sliver of relief, but then came something worse. Breathing slow, steady breaths from the other side of the door. So close, so intimate. Inhale, exhale, in perfect sync with his own. He could feel it now, not just hear it. The vibrations of that breath, so close to the thin wooden barrier separating him from it. For a terrifying moment, it felt as if this presence was breathing through him, as if their lungs had merged, sharing the same desperate rhythm. His hands clutched the blanket tighter, and then a whisper. "Why are you afraid, Thomas?" His name, it knew his name. The voice was gentle, soft, not menacing, but intimate, delicate, almost affectionate. Thomas's skin prickled. His throat constricted. His voice emerged as a shaky whisper. Who are you?" A long pause answered him. The breathing continued. In, out. Finally, the voice returned. "You've come to find me." Thomas shook his head furiously. I don't know you. I don't know what this is." A soft sigh. "Room 13 remembers you, Thomas." The words struck him like icy needles. His mind reeled. The confusion twisted inside him, blending with the rising terror. "I've never been here before," he insisted, panic breaking through his voice. But the voice remained calm. "Not in this life." The statement floated in the thick air, wrapping around him like invisible hands. The room seemed to close in tighter. Thomas's breathing grew rapid, shallow, and then another knock. Knock, 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 louder, closer, as if invisible knuckles gently but firmly struck the door, just inches from his frozen body. His gaze locked onto the old wooden door. The handle trembled ever so slightly, as if tested by unseen fingers. His heartbeat roared. "Don't open it," he whispered to himself, tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. The whisper returned. "Open it, Thomas. Let me in." The voice wasn't angry. It wasn't demanding. It was inviting. The air thickened, almost syrup-like in his lungs. Thomas closed his eyes, rocking slightly, whispering prayers under his breath. The fire had dimmed into a faint orange glow. Shadows danced lazily, casting shifting shapes that resembled fingers stretching from the darkness. Minutes passed, the silence grew unbearable, and then scratch, scratch, scratch. Long fingernails, slowly, deliberately, dragged down the surface. Of the door, the scraping wasn't fast. It was slow, intimate, teasing. Thomas's whole body trembled. "Please, stop, ... He begged softly. The scraping ceased. Silence returned, heavier than before. The only sound was the metronome of his own heartbeat and the constant ticking of the clock. Tick, tick, tick. Then barely audible, a final whisper slipped into the air like vapor. "Sleep well, Thomas. We'll speak again." The presence faded. The room relaxed slightly, as if released from an invisible grip at last. Thomas's exhaustion overtook him. His head dropped, breath slowing. Sleep claimed him. Not with peace, but with heavy, reluctant surrender. The clock ticked on. The morning sunlight struggled to pierce through the heavy curtains. Thomas awoke with a start. Breath shallow, chest tight. His entire body ached with exhaustion. The memories of the night clung to him like damp cobwebs, sticky and suffocating. He rubbed his temples, trying to ground himself. The fire had long gone cold. The clock ticked steadily, indifferent to the horrors of the night. Tick, tick. He forced himself out of bed. The room felt colder than it should. The wooden floor creaked under his feet, as if protesting his every step. Thomas hesitated for a moment before turning toward the door. His gaze locked onto the worn brass handle. Nothing looked out of place. No scratches, no marks. But he knew what he had heard, what he had felt. He reached out, his fingertips hovering just above the cool metal. The faintest tingle crawled up his spine. With a deep breath, he opened the door. The hallway stretched before him like a long, narrow throat, lined with dim sconces, flickering weakly against the tall, aged walls. The faint scent of dust and old wood floated in the air. But what struck him most was the silence. No guests, no voices, no creaking floors or distant whispers of movement. Just that oppressive stillness that felt unnatural as he stepped out. His eyes involuntarily drifted to his left wardroom 13. The door stood perfectly still, shut, silent. But somehow it seemed to watch him, like it was waiting. Thomas's breath quickened. "It's just an old hotel," he whispered to himself. Old places creak, old places whisper. But the weight in his chest refused to lift. He moved cautiously down the hallway. Footsteps muffled against the worn carpet runner. The walls seemed to close in slightly as he walked, the dim light playing tricks with the long shadows that stretched and swayed like thin, grasping fingers. Then he heard it, a soft shuffle behind him. Thomas froze. He didn't dare turn around immediately. His ears strained. Silence he swallowed. Hard and slowly glanced over his shoulder. Nothing. The empty corridor stared back at him, long and endless. But then a whisper, faint, barely audible. "Thomas." It was his name, soft, floating through the air like smoke. His stomach twisted into knots. He whipped his head back forward and quickened his pace, hands trembling at his sides. The staircase appeared at the end of the hall like a distant exit from a nightmare. He practically stumbled toward it, his breath becoming ragged. But as he reached the top step, something cold brushed against the back of his neck. Breath, gentle, deliberate. He spun round instantly. The hallway was empty. The shadows danced silently, mocking him. His chest heaved. His fingers clutched the wooden banister tightly, and then a voice, much closer this time, almost at his ear. "We remember you." Thomas recoiled, his heart hammering violently. "Who are you?" he shouted, voice cracking. Silence swallowed his cry. The only answer was the steady flicker of the gas lamps. His knees weakened. The fear gnawed at the edges of his sanity. The hallway was alive. It breathed, it watched, it remembered. Downstairs. Agatha stood behind the front desk, hands neatly folded, her calm gaze meeting him as though she had been waiting. "Good morning, Mr. Thomas," she whispered softly, almost too gently. Thomas stared at her, his voice shaky. "Agatha, is there something you're not telling me about this place? About room 13? Agatha's smile remained fixed. Her eyes, however, gleamed with something deeper, something knowing. "There are some stories," she whispered, "but they are old stories, the kind best left undisturbed." Thomas swallowed, frustration rising. "I heard things, voices last night. Something was at my door." Agatha tilted her head slightly, her voice dropping even lower. "Many guests hear whispers in the night, but they are only echoes, Mr. Thomas. This hotel, it holds echoes of its past." Her words sent a chill racing down his spine. "Echoes," he repeated. She nodded slowly, her eyes never leaving his. "Some echoes are very old, and some are waiting to be heard again." Thomas felt his skin crawl. The hotel wasn't haunted in the way he feared. It was something worse. It remembered, and whatever remembered him was growing bolder. The morning sun did little to chase away the lingering chill that clung to the hotel's bones. Thomas sat in the dim dining hall, stirring a cup of black coffee with a trembling hand. The liquid inside rippled softly, disturbed by the slight tremor in his fingers. Around him, the room was empty. The heavy drapes remained drawn, filtering the sunlight into thin golden beams that barely touched the dark wooden walls. The silence was thick, only broken by the faint ticking of a clock somewhere in the distance. Tick, tick, tick. He hadn't spoken much since his encounter in the hallway. The voices, the breath on his neck, the whispers calling his name. His mind fought to rationalize, to explain it all as some strange dream. But deep inside, a primal dread coiled in his stomach, whispering the truth he didn't want to admit. Something in this hotel knew him, and it wasn't done yet. The chair creaked as Thomas shifted his weight. He glanced up when he heard the soft click of shoes approaching. Agatha appeared silently beside him, her hands folded in front of her as always. Her presence, though gentle, carried an unsettling calm, as if she was never surprised by anything that happened here. "Did you sleep any better, Mr. Thomas?" she asked softly. He hesitated. "No, not really," he admitted, his voice flat. Agatha's head tilted slightly, her eyes steady. The mind plays strange tricks in unfamiliar places. She whispered, "Old buildings hold many echoes." Thomas's jaw tightened. "Echoes don't breathe on your neck," he said quietly. For a moment, something flickered in Agatha's expression, almost too quick to catch. But then her gentle smile returned. "There are places in this world, Mr. Thomas, where the past lingers, heavy like fog. Some places never forget." Thomas wanted to press her further, but the weight in her words left him speechless. Instead, he whispered to himself, "Neither do I." Hours passed as the day dragged on. Thomas wandered the narrow streets outside, hoping the fresh air might quiet his racing thoughts. But even the town seemed oddly muted. as if the very land surrounding the hotel shared in its unsettling atmosphere. By late afternoon, storm clouds began gathering, casting the town into premature twilight. Thomas returned to the hotel, hearts heavy with unease. The moment he stepped back inside, that familiar, oppressive stillness greeted him, as if the hotel was inhaling slowly, savoring his return. He stood once more before room 13. The door, as always, remained closed. Its worn surface reflected little of the dim hallway light, yet it radiated an undeniable pull, like a silent invitation. Thomas's fingers hovered over the doorknob. He swallowed hard. "Just open it," part of him whispered. "End this." But his hand trembled, unable to grasp the handle. And then he heard it again. Tap, 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 from within. Soft, rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Thomas stepped back, breath catching in his throat, and then a voice. Faint, but clear. "Come in, Thomas." His knees weakened. "How do you know my name?" he whispered under his breath, voice shaking. The voice responded immediately, as if it had been listening all along. "We've always known you." A cold shiver crawled up his spine. His heart pounded in his ears. Tick, tick, tick. The clock's rhythm followed him even here, as if marking the slow unraveling of his sanity. Suddenly, the door handle jiggled. Thomas stumbled backward, pressing against the opposite wall. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. The handle turned slowly, once, twice, but the door remained closed, as though locked from within. The voice whispered again, this time lower. "Darker, let us in, or come inside. Thomas, you belong here." He shook his head violently. "No, I don't belong here." But even as he denied it, his vision blurred, his mind spinning with flashes images he couldn't place. Dark halls, faces he didn't recognize, shadows swirling around him. A deep sense of déjà vu gripped his chest. I've never. He, Stammered. The voice cut through his confusion. "You've always been here, Thomas, even when you weren't." The words sank into him like ice water. The handle stopped turning, and then silence, heavy, oppressive, alive. Thomas fled down the hallway, heart hammering, the walls seeming to close in around him at the far end. Agatha stood once more, her calm eyes following him. He stumbled toward her, voice cracking. "Agatha, please, tell me what this place is." She looked at him for a long moment, her voice barely a whisper. "This is a place of memory, Mr. Thomas, and some memories never die." Night fell swiftly. The storm clouds that had loomed all afternoon finally broke open. Rain lashed against the windows in heavy sheets, driven sideways by howling winds. Thunder rumbled through the mountains like distant, growling beasts. The entire hotel seemed to shiver with each clap of thunder. Thomas stood by his window, eyes following the chaotic dance of rain against the glass. His reflection stared back at him, pale and hollow-eyed. The events of the past 2 nights weighed heavily on his mind. But worse was the growing certainty that something in this place recognized him. It wasn't coincidence, it was memory, and it was waiting. A sudden knock at the door startled him. 3 sharp raps. Knock, knock, knock. His breath caught. For a moment he froze, muscles tense, mind racing. Then, cautiously, he approached the door and slowly pulled it open. Agatha stood there, perfectly composed despite the howling wind echoing through the hallways. "Forgive me for disturbing you, Mr. Thomas," she whispered, "but there's something you should see." Thomas blinked, confused. See? Agatha nodded, her voice low. An old part of the hotel. Normally, we keep it closed, but perhaps seeing it will help ease your mind. Every instinct screamed against the idea, but curiosity and the need for answers pulled him forward. He followed her through dimly lit corridors he hadn't seen before. The air grew colder as they walked, each step seeming to lead him deeper into the hotel's hidden heart. Eventually, they reached a narrow hallway lined with tall, ancient mirrors on both sides. The mirror hallway. The mirrors were old, their silver backing faded, their surfaces slightly warped. The flickering wall lamps cast eerie reflections that seemed to shift unnaturally as they passed. The air was dense here, heavy, charged. Thomas could hear his own heartbeat echo faintly in the narrow space. Thump, thump, thump. Agatha stopped, midway, turning to him. This part of the hotel was built long before most of the rest, she whispered. Many stories surround these mirrors. Thomas frowned. Stories. She nodded slowly. They say the mirrors remember every soul that has passed before them. They reflect not just your face, but your essence. Thomas swallowed as he glanced into the mirror nearest to him. His breath hitched. For a brief second, he thought he saw movement behind his reflection. A shadow, a face, almost his, but not quite. Its eyes were deeper, darker. Its mouth curled into a faint, knowing smile. He stumbled back, heart pounding. What was that? He whispered. Agatha's voice remained calm. Sometimes the past leaks through. The rain intensified outside, slamming against the windows. The flickering lights in the hallway dimmed, as though struggling against the encroaching darkness. Thomas's breathing grew shallow as he continued to gaze into the mirror. And then, behind his reflection, he saw it again, a figure standing, still, almost blending into the shadows. Long, slender fingers extended from the dark, brushing gently against the glass from the other side. Tap, tap, tap. His stomach twisted. Is someone before he could finish? Agatha softly placed her hand on his arm. Don't speak to them, Mr. Thomas, she whispered. They listen. They always listen. The temperature in the hallway dropped sharply. Thomas's breath came out as thin clouds of mist. The figure behind the mirror remained motionless, but its head tilted slightly, as though studying him. Tick, tick, tick. The distant clock seemed to pulse louder. The air thickened, and then the figure whispered, soft, faint, directly into Thomas's mind. Come back to us. He staggered, gripping the wall for support. I don't understand, he cried out, voice cracking. The mirror darkened momentarily, and multiple faint faces surfaced, countless reflections of himself, some twisted, some hollow, some silently screaming. He stumbled backward, nearly falling. Agatha steadied him. Do not linger here, Mr. Thomas. These mirrors, they remember too much. She guided him out of the hallway swiftly, her voice barely audible above the roaring storm. As they stepped back into the safer, warmer corridors, Thomas shivered, but not from cold. The whispers still echoed inside his head. Come back to us, ... The storm raged through the night. Thomas lay awake, staring at the ceiling, as shadows twisted and crawled across the plaster like living things. The rain pounded the windows relentlessly, each drop like a tiny fist hammering against the glass. Sleep was impossible. The whispers from the mirror hallway haunted him, looping endlessly in his mind. Come back to us. Their soft voices coiled around his thoughts. like invisible hands reaching from some dark place, gently pulling him toward something. He could not see. He didn't know if it was fear or a strange, growing pull. Something inside him was beginning to respond. As the clock struck 3 a.m., a faint creak echoed from the far corner of the room. Thomas sat up sharply, his eyes darted toward the sound. It came from the small writing desk. Near the window, the desk drawer, which had always been closed, now stood slightly ajar. He slowly slid out of bed, bare feet brushing against the cold wooden floor, heart pounding in his chest. His breathing slowed as he approached the desk. The drawer creaked softly as he pulled it open. Inside, wrapped in brittle, yellowed cloth, was a small leather-bound journal. Its cover was cracked and worn with age, the leather almost crumbling. Under his fingers, there was no name, no indication of who it belonged to. But as his fingers traced the edges, a strange familiarity washed over him. His pulse quickened. He carefully opened it. The handwriting inside was delicate but hurried, as if written under duress. The first page read, November 13th, 1923. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. The voices have returned. The same whispers, the same shadows behind the mirrors. They call to me night after night. Thomas's blood ran cold. It mirrored his own experience. He flipped through more pages, each entry growing more desperate, more fragmented. They know my name. They whisper it as I walk these halls. I see myself in the mirrors, but it's not me. It's never me. Agatha says it's only the wind, but she knows. She knows more than she admits. Last night, I saw my reflection smile when I did not. I swear I saw its lips move. Thomas's hands trembled as he turned to the final entry. The handwriting had grown jagged, frantic. Room 13 is the key. It started there. It always starts there. They say I've always been here, even when I wasn't. Maybe it's true. Maybe I never left. Thomas shut the journal, breath coming in ragged gasps. His reflection in the window stared back at him, pale, wide-eyed, as though watching him with growing interest. A flash of lightning lit the room for a brief instant. For a split second, in the glass, he saw it again. A shadow standing directly behind him, tall, still waiting. When the light faded, the shadow was gone. Thomas stumbled backward, pulse racing. Who wrote this? He whispered aloud, though part of him already knew. The journal, it felt familiar, like something he had once owned, or was meant to find. The storm roared louder. Thunder boomed overhead, and then 3 soft knocks on his door. Knock, 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 knock. His breath caught. He approached the door slowly, every muscle screaming for him to run. But something stronger, a terrible, curious pull, urged him forward. He placed his hand on the handle, his heart hammered before he could turn. The whispers returned, not from behind the door, but from inside his room, inside his mind. We are waiting, Thomas. Come back to us. The words wrapped around him like a cold fog. Thomas stumbled away from the door, collapsing into the corner, covering his ears. But the whispers didn't stop. They grew louder, closer, inside. Come back, come back. The storm outside raged like a living thing, but inside room 13, something much older, much darker, was slowly waking up. The rain never stopped. It had become a constant, almost hypnotic rhythm, like countless fingertips tapping against the windows. The entire hotel seemed to breathe with the storm now, creaking softly as though settling into some ancient pulse. Thomas sat on the floor, his back pressed hard against the corner, breath shallow. His hands trembled violently, his palms damp with sweat. No matter how hard he squeezed his ears, the whispers seeped through. "We are waiting, Thomas, ... We've always been waiting, ... The storm outside was deafening, but inside the room, a deeper, older storm was building. He felt it in his bones. Something was about to happen. Something inevitable. Hours passed, or perhaps minutes. Time lost all meaning. His eyes locked on the door. It hadn't opened. Not yet, but he knew it would. It was only a matter of time. Then, as though answering his thoughts, the door handle twitched, just slightly. Barely noticeable. Then again, click. A sharp sound in the stillness. The latch released itself. The door creaked open. Just an inch. Cold air rushed into the room from the hallway, carrying with it a faint scent of damp earth and something older, rotting. Thomas, single quotes, as breathing quickened. His instincts screamed at him to flee, to close the door, to lock it, to never open it again. But something stronger, some hidden thread pulling deep within him, held him in place. His eyes stared into the dark sliver beyond the door. There was only shadow and silence. A soft, slow tapping began from the hallway. Tap, tap, tap. Bare footsteps, pale, almost translucent. A figure appeared, tall, thin, wearing a long tattered coat that dragged softly across the wooden floor. Its face was partially obscured by a wide-brimmed hat, its features hidden in deep shadow. But Thomas recognized it instantly. He didn't know how, but he knew it was himself, or some twisted version of him. The same eyes, the same face, but hollow, empty, lifeless. Its movements were slow, deliberate, as though savoring every step. It stopped just outside the door, standing perfectly still, the hat tilted slightly, as if observing him. Thomas. The whisper was not from the figure's mouth, but from everywhere around him. Inside him, the reflection spoke again. "You've always been here." Thomas shook his head violently. "No, this isn't real." The figure stepped closer, its movements gliding unnaturally, almost weightless. The shadows behind it churned like smoke. "You were never meant to leave." The air grew impossibly cold. Thomas's breath came out in thin clouds. His legs refused to move. The pull was too strong. Then, something behind the figure began to emerge from the darkness. More shapes, more faces, flickering, in and out like broken reflections. Dozens, hundreds, all versions of him. Some screaming, some crying, some whispering. Each trapped in their own endless loop of horror. Each calling him home. "Come back to us, ... complete what was left undone, ... The tall version of himself extended a pale hand, its fingers impossibly long, bending like twisted branches. "The door is open now. It's time." Thomas's vision blurred. The room spun. The whispers filled his skull. Like a growing storm inside his mind, he wanted to resist, to fight, but a terrible warmth began to spread inside him, a strange, aching familiarity, like falling into a dream he once knew. Like returning, he reached out a trembling hand. His fingers hovered near the pale, inviting palm, so close, so close. The moment their fingertips nearly touched, a sudden, violent knock echoed through the hotel. Bang, bang, bang. Loud, urgent, breaking the rhythm. Thomas gasped, yanked backward into himself. The figure and its countless shadows froze. The knock came again. Bang, bang, bang. From behind him, from the window, Thomas turned sharply. Outside, barely visible through the storm, stood Agatha, her face pale but determined, her fist still pressed against the glass. She shouted something, but the wind devoured her words. Thomas's mind reeled. How is she outside, in the storm? The reflection whispered again, softer this time. Don't listen to her. She wants to take you away from us. Thomas's breath grew rapid, two forces pulling him apart. The storm outside roared like a beast. But inside the room, something even older, even hungrier, waited with patient, open arms. He was teetering on the edge, and soon, one side would claim him. The storm outside reached its furious peak. Winds howled like wild beasts, slamming against the walls with deafening roars. The old hotel groaned, creaked, as if straining under the weight of something immense and ancient waking inside its bones. Inside. Room 13. Time seemed frozen. Thomas stood trembling, caught between two worlds. Behind him, Agatha at the window, pounding desperately, her mouth forming silent words lost to the storm. Before him, his pale reflection and its legion of distorted versions whispering in unison, "Come back to us, ... You've always belonged here." The air grew heavier, pressing down on him like a great invisible hand. His heartbeat thundered in his chest. His thoughts spiraled into chaos. What is real? Who am I? Have I always been here? The whispers answered as if reading his mind. Yes, you were never meant to leave. The tall figure stepped closer again, its pale hand still extended, just a breath away. Join us, Thomas, you're home. The shadows behind it churned, faces flickering like candle flames in a dark corridor. Some wept, some screamed, some smiled. Agatha's voice suddenly cut through, faint but sharp. Finally, through the howling wind, he heard her. "Thomas, it's not you, it's feeding on you." Her voice trembled but carried fierce urgency. "Fight it. You don't belong to them." Thomas's vision blurred again, but something inside him stirred. A small flame, a memory, not of fear, but of choice. He remembered the first time he arrived at this hotel, the strange sense of familiarity, the sense of déjà vu, but also the decision, the choice to check into room 13. Did I choose, or was I drawn here? The whispers grew more insistent, louder. "You belong to us. You've always been ours. You are us." Thomas staggered backward. No, I am not you." He clutched his head as the pressure grew, the voices merging into one overwhelming scream. But that small flame inside him flared brighter. He was still himself. He still had a choice. Suddenly, Agatha's fist slammed once more against the window, shattering it into a rain of glass. The storm burst into the room, cold wind and rain cutting through the suffocating air. Lightning illuminated everything for a brief, blinding moment. In that flash, Thomas saw the truth. The reflections weren't real. They were echoes, memories, traps, empty shells feeding on his mind. He wasn't trapped by them, he was feeding them. The realization snapped like a whip through his consciousness. He stepped back from the pale figure. "No more," he whispered. The reflection's face twisted into something monstrous, hollow eyes widening, mouth stretching unnaturally open. The chorus of whispers turned into shrieks of rage. "No, you are one of us." The shadows writhed, swirling like a violent sea. But Thomas stood firm. The storm howled around him. Rain drenched his skin. Agatha reached through the shattered window, her hand outstretched. "Thomas, take my hand." He turned toward her, heart pounding. For a heartbeat, everything held still. The shadows behind him howled. The wind screamed. But his choice was clear. He lunged toward Agatha, grabbing her hand. The moment their hands connected, the hotel seemed to scream. The air rippled. The shadows imploded inward, sucked into a collapsing void. The pale figure distorted, twisting into nothingness. Faces shrieked as they were pulled into the spiraling blackness. The entire room shook violently. The old walls groaned. The lights flickered, and then silence. Only the rain remained, gently falling through the broken window. Thomas found himself outside room 13, still gripping Agatha's hand tightly. The hallway was empty, the mirrors gone. No whispers, no shadows, just cold air, and the soft sound of rain. Agatha smiled faintly, eyes shining with relief. "You're free now," she whispered. Thomas, still trembling, nodded slowly. He looked back at the now silent door of room 13. Its presence was gone, for the first time since arriving. It was truly silent. He whispered softly, almost in disbelief, "I'm free, ...